You know, most people think that they can recognize poison ivy in the winter, but then believe that this vine right here is, when it absolutely is not. So in this video, I'm going to show you the characteristics that you need to know to easily identify the notorious poison ivy, even in the dead of winter when it has no leaves. And then we'll find out what this vine actually is. Plus, I'm going to try to answer the question that I'm sure a lot of you are wondering. Is poison ivy still poisonous to touch in the middle of winter? Oh my gosh, I don't want to do it, but I have to know. I have to know. Okay, here we go. Once you watch this video and you can confidently distinguish poison ivy, you may be tempted to remove it immediately. But before you run out and do that, give me a chance to try to convince you otherwise. Either way, we need to be able to identify it first. I'm going to start with the details that most people probably don't pay much attention to, and then I'm going to move on to the ones that you think you know. And as we go through all the details, don't worry about memorizing every little thing, because I've got all of them in this downloadable guide for you right here. More on that in a bit. Okay, so now I have an actual vine of poison ivy next to me right here. I'm gonna do my best to keep away from it and not let it touch my face while I'm doing this recording. So first, what I want to do is I want to look at the dormant buds of poison ivy. They're actually quite striking and distinctive if you look out for them. Poison ivy has buds that are yellow to cream in color. They don't have any bud scales on them, so we call that a naked bud, and they'll usually appear quite hairy if you look at them. The buds at the ends of the twigs are much larger than the ones that are on the sides, and if you look, sometimes they're even hard to see at all. Because they're that much larger at the end, we call them true terminal buds. Directly below the buds are the leaf scars, which are more brown compared to the gray color of the twigs. We'll also make note of the shape right now. That'll be important a little bit later on. And by the way, if you don't recognize any of these terms, don't worry, because you can check out my free introduction to winter tree ID video after this one. It'll teach you everything that you need to know to identify wild, edible, and medicinal trees, shrubs, and lianas. Have you ever heard of lianas before? That is the technical term for a woody vine like poison ivy. Anyway, the twigs of this past year's growth are typically pubescent. They are covered in hairs. As those age into the second year and become branchlets, they usually are more glabrous or lacking in hairs. One thing that I noticed about poison ivy while I was working on the video is that the branchlets can extend further away from the vine. So if you well, be careful when you're doing this, but if you come up to the tree and you look up, you'll see them shooting off away from the tree. In the summertime, especially if it's growing up a tree, this can create a very deceptive appearance that makes it look like it's the leaves of the tree when in fact it's actually poison ivy. A really big thing about poison ivy, and what people often associate with it, is that it produces aerial roots in between the leaf nodes. As the vine ages, those aerial roots continue to emerge and become denser and denser, which is where we get the famous phrase, "hairy vine, no friend of mine." But just because a vine has aerial roots does not mean that it's poison ivy. This leads us back to the mystery plant that we started with. And as you can see here, no worries about touching or coming in contact with this one. I want us to compare it detail by detail with poison ivy, but for now I'm going to call it Plant X, and I'll explain why I'm doing this after we find out what it is. I wanted to show you some of those lesser known details because it's actually really easy to use them to tell the plants apart. Plant X buds are usually far smaller and generally quite inconspicuous. They are more brown in color overall and much stubbier in stature. Also, they don't have distinct true terminal buds like poison ivy did. Going further, they sit atop way more rounded leaf scars, and the twigs are usually a darker brown color with lighter spots on them called lenticels. Compare that to poison ivy's gray twigs, which have darker lenticels on them. Also, if the fruits are present, and they often do persist into the wintertime, it's a very easy giveaway. Poison ivy has clusters of berries that are cream to white, whereas Plant X has berries that are dark blue. Both, however, are poisonous to humans. Younger vines of Plant X start with clusters of tendrils that only emerge at the leaf nodes. If you look closely at the ends of the tendrils too, you can see these little adhesive discs on them. It's a really cool feature. As the vine gets more mature, it will start to put out aerial roots in between the leaf nodes. So how do we distinguish those aerial roots from poison ivy? That's usually the part that confuses people. This is basically how I think about it. Plant X has more two-dimensional aerial roots. They're flatter overall. Even when they're mature, if you get close to them, you can usually still see the bark of the vine that's exposed on the top. With poison ivy, the roots are usually darker and thinner, and they grow more three-dimensionally, which gives them their characteristic hairy appearance. Okay, so with all of that, what then is our mystery vine? Well, it is none other than Virginia creeper. And it's kind of funny because that is another one that people confuse for poison ivy even in the summertime. It's a year-round thing. Now let's take a look at what we just did there, right? We first looked really closely at the details of this plant, and then we tried to find out what the name for it was. Fully describing a plant before you worry about what the name is a practice that I think a lot of foragers and naturalists can really benefit from. And I know that that was a lot of details, but as I mentioned before, everything is covered with photos in my downloadable guides. Check the description for a link so that you can get yours. Okay, so now you have found and properly distinguished your poison ivy vine. Now what? At this point, many people would be tempted to remove it. However, if it's not posing a direct threat to anyone, I would actually encourage you to leave it. Those berries that we learned about earlier are actually an important food source for native birds and other animals. So while I personally wouldn't go out and plant a bunch of it, I see no reason why you should go out of your way to try to remove it. Now, many of you might be wondering the same thing that I am now wondering. We've all been told that poison ivy is still poisonous in the wintertime. But is that really true? We are going to put it to the test. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. First, I'm gonna take this jacket off because I don't want to get any poison ivy on it. All right. Okay, I want to know two things. Number one, will the buds cause a reaction? And then number two, do the hairy vines cause a reaction? Buds on the left arm, and then we'll do vine on the right arm. I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this? I don't want to do this. But I'm curious. I have to know. Okay. All right, you're all watching? And there we go. So, getting the bud on my left forearm. All right, not going to wash that. I know that I react to poison ivy, so I think this will be a good test if that's actually going to happen. Awesome. Okay, now for the other one. Here, get a little bit closer for this one. Alrighty, I wanted you all to be able to see. You can see kind of the hairs on the vine sticking out right there. Here we go. That's it. Dosing myself with poison ivy, Toxicodendron radicans. So now, now all that we have to do is wait. I'm gonna put the results of our little experiment in another video, and if that is done, then it'll show up next to me right now. If not, you can subscribe for more fun experiments and identification videos just like this one. Anyways, I hope to see you there.